Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello, bonsoir.
Thank you all for staying. Although I think we should all thank actually Tilde and Olivier for staying for this discussion. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that, but I think tonight was the best night. Honestly, it was so playful, and I loved the fact that you were adding small things because now I can actually understand what things are changing. So, what changes from one time to the next? I don't want to say from one show to the next, from one performance to the next, from one living exhibition to the next. So, what happens and what changes from one time to the next?
Honestly, very practically, it made a difference to us that we knew that we were only doing one performance tonight. Truly. To perform it is always such a living thing for Olivier and me. It feels like we're making it up every time we do it. But it has to be faced that doing it twice in a night is a lot. And so knowing that we only did one today, grâce à this conversation, I think made it feel looser for us.
That only means that you should be staying for longer so that you can have it just one time tonight, I think.
Yeah, maybe another time, a month.
Yes, I agree. So, is it the clothes or the characters that pre-existed in the clothes? Is it the clothes or the characters that you bring in the clothes each and every time? What happens, like for both of you?
Well, there's a certain amount that is predetermined. I mean, we have a limited amount of pieces that we chose, I want to say 3 years ago, 2020. We went to Rome and to the Atelier Farani, and we chose the pieces that we wanted to work with. And there were reasons that we chose certain ones. And if it isn't too fanciful, it was almost as if they played with us. The ones that felt like they were up for a dance came with us. And it had something to do with the significance of, you know, who they were dressing in the film. So, for example, as you may notice, I have great affection for Laura Betti and of course for Pierpaolo himself. So in A Canterbury Tale, when we had the opportunity to bring these two costumes, the one of the wife of Bath and the one of Chaucer, that was particularly kind of resonant for us.
And what is the secret that you whisper?
You'll never know.
Of course, but I really wanted to hear
You'll
that.
never know.
Are they sounds or words?
You'll never know. That's what imagination is for.
Well, I would say that they will tell me.
Yeah, ask them. But they won't tell.
I will. And how about the extras? Did they also tell you, pick me, pick me?
You know, you have to know also, it was a particularly, I don't have to say that, but it was a good moment for us tonight because it was, like you said, playful. But we have to recognize sometimes, despite the work we decided before, since 3 years, we decided some moments, some nights, some evening, costumes are not the same. For example, 2 days ago, costumes were not very easy with them. So they indicated something quite different. So every night we have something different, and a detail which could be a detail for another piece is a big moment. For example, when a coat is falling down, it indicates something new. So we are always very concentrated to hear what costumes are saying for us.
You just gave me 2 words that I actually did write down. As you can see, I'm very organized. One of them is detail, and the other one is silence. And I wonder if any of these words actually exist. Is there such a thing as a detail in a sense that people think of details as something that does not matter. And is there such a thing as silence when something can be so full of emotions and even words?
It feels to me as if it's all about detail. It's only detail. And in a sense, it's only about silence as well. I mean, it's not for nothing that, when people have asked Olivier and I to describe this work that we make together, and we've been making these pieces now for over 10 years, and there's always this question, what is it? Is it theater? Is it dance? Is it a recitation? Is it poetry? What is it? And the thing that we've come up with that doesn't cover everything, but most accurately describes what we think we're doing is living exhibition. Olivier is originally curator, and well, you must speak about your journey of being frustrated with working with mannequins. No offense, but
I really enjoy to play with Tilda instead with mannequins. But I love both. And you spoke about silence, but it's not a real silence. It's a silence which is, because if you are here, we wanted to let the costume speak, to let the fabric speak. You can hear the sounds of the satin, the sounds of the muslin, the sound of the wool. It's not a real silence.
And of the paper.
And also the paper, which is comment dire, when you are a curator, you are playing a lot with paper. It's something strange, but especially as a fashion curator, you are playing a lot with paper. So it's, but as you say, it's a complete new field. We try to open to think, to rethink the way to do an exhibition. I have this story I said 2 days ago, maybe, or maybe more. One day I was in Bologna with Gaël and we visited an instrument, how would you say, a musée d'instruments?
Musical instrument.
Music instrument museum. And it was very nice to see every famous instrument, but all of them were under glasses. So they had no sounds. It was a complete silence. And 5 minutes later, we walked with my partner, Gaël, and we heard something coming from a window, which was a music played by the conservatoire, students in a conservatoire. And I remember exactly, it was a moment where we met, and I said to Gaël, you know what, I was wrong. I did 200 exhibitions, but it was exhibition without sounds. So I don't know if we are making silence or if we are making sound, but I'm sure we are making something alive, maybe. Oh, I'm not afraid about death, but I'm able to talk with clothes, with costumes about death, with voice.
We made several pieces before now with archive. We made a piece in 2012 called Impossible Wardrobe, working with the archive of the Musée Galliera, where Olivier was director. And these pieces are unwearable, and that piece is a sort of défilé. We presented it during Fashion Week in Paris, which was very delightful because there was nothing for sale. It was about presenting these pieces to themselves in the mirror, and then back they go into these storage vaults forever. And we made other pieces about people's clothes, all of our normal clothes, and the lives that people live in them. And then at a certain point, I remember us saying we wanted to make something around cinema costume, because cinema costume has another layer, because cinema costume lives in another way. It lives in the frame of the film on the screen. And if it is a film by Pasolini, some of us know those frames very, very well forever. And so to imagine taking, encountering those objects that we know so well from those frames that are living in the Atelier Farani forever, in the racks, going looking for them like looking for gold, was another whole nother layer, and so exciting because if we, for those of us who know, dare I say it, Jocasta Magnani wearing that hat, we know those images, but that hat only lives in those images. And so to give that hat another dance, to give that hat another chance, another shape, another head, was so thrilling for us.
Well, and death shall have no dominion in that sense.
Nor cinema.
No cinema, exactly. And I suppose that being in Greece, which is actually definitely a country of ghosts, and the same time that we actually hate them because we want to talk about the now, at the same time we worship them. So my question is all about this word, ghosts. When are they our friends? Why do they scare us sometimes? And why do we invite them, even if we don't know what we're going to feel when they come?
What would you say about that? I mean, about ghosts. I'm very familiar with ghosts and very happy to live amongst them, and I always have been. And I agree with you. I think that as actually, I have to confess, many of the pieces of work that I've made, both in cinema and with Olivier over the last few years, actually the subject is ghosts and this coexistence with ghosts. What's the alternative? You coexist or you don't? I mean, how do you not? How do you resist living with ghosts?
There are people who resist because they're scared of being in touch with death. But if you think about it, I mean, I'm sure you're going to become very philosophical, but even when it comes to philosophy, it is what it is. It is all about a study on death. But you brought to life even Pasolini, even for people and to people who haven't seen these films, who know the name of Pasolini, but they haven't necessarily seen these films. And you were telling me that when you were working on the piece, you were not like watching the films again and again and again. So I'm wondering how much are the actual films involved in that process after you've seen them? Because to me, you actually changed the actual fabric of the film into fabric itself. So the connection between the costumes, the clothes, the fabric, the film, how does it move from when it started to where it is now?
The link was, or rather the protagonists are the costumes. They guide us. And the films, they're there because of the films, but this is their moment. And there's something thrilling about taking we reference very occasionally and very tangentially movements that certain costumes make in the films. For example, in the Decameron, the amazing pink dress that stands by itself, when I incarnate that, I make a gesture which the person wearing that costume makes in the film. For an instant, she makes that. She's like in movement and she goes like that, and we chose it to just freeze frame. And the same with the dress that I throw up in the air. There's a moment when it's up in the air. But in general, we're trying to give the costumes the opportunity to do different things that the costume designer, and by the way, we have to now mention him, we should have mentioned him immediately, Danilo Donati, in his genius, may I say, has made these incredibly sculptural and robust costumes that could do all sorts of things and could go on doing all sorts of things, but they are in these frozen moments in the films.
So you make a dress look like a swan who's diving in the lake.
personally, I was interested to see how Tilda could wear again some monument, because they are monument, or even at the same level, how she couldn't be able to do that. And the performance is also talking about that. Sometimes it's impossible to replay a coat, a dress. That's why we decided to play face to Tilda, sometimes on the shoulder, sometimes in different level, as comment dire, she could explain different level of the life of the costume. But as a curator also, I remember after seeing for the first time, trying to meet the costume with Tilda, we tried to understood how Danilo Donati used to work with Pier Paolo Pasolini. And instead, to see the movies we saw by the past and we saw very late into the process, we try to understand the origin of the inspiration. So we went back to the inspiration, which means Giotto, Bruegel, a lot of very famous painter, in order not to do a biopic, but to serve the inspiration of Danilo Donati.
I really wanted to ask you something, or actually tell you something, and then I would love to hear what you think about it. When Danilo Donati was filmed with Pier Paolo Pasolini, you mentioned at some point in another discussion that we had that they paid so much attention to every single color, of course, every single piece of fabric, although some of these films were in black and white. But when they were filming them, they were living them in color. So I would really like your comment on the essence of the process itself, that in order to come up with such a black and white film, it had to be done in color.
Well, I mean, working in black and white is always, you know, any designer working in cinema, working in black and white will tell you that there are, you know, it's very, choosing what to work with, choosing the colors to work with is a very precise business. There are some colors that don't translate, and there are some colors that really kind of withhold or sustain their resonance in black and white. But I think if I understand correctly, your question is about the experience of filming, you know, as opposed to what we eventually see in the films. And I don't know. I can't. My sense is that it was always a sort of party, which is the best way, of course, to make a film, and that what both Pasolini and Donati always did was make a world. You know, the world, Boccaccio's world of the Decameron, or Chaucer's world of the Canterbury Tales, or even the world of Salo. They are complete. And they made them kind of not hermetic, but they made them like bubbles that they just blew into the air. And I imagine that working in those environments must have been very very encompassing for the people who worked on those films.
I'm sure that filming was also a ritual at that point. There was a comment or a question at some point regarding nudity. Where is it? How can you do Salo without naked bodies, without blood? And each time I see you on this stage, and to be honest, I really felt like I had to remove my shoes in order to step on that rather modest material that becomes something grand when it is part of such an experience. I always watch your feet with your lovely blue-blooded horizontal veins. And I was thinking that all the raw nudity is there. So how did you even decide in which moments you would be barefoot and in which moments you would be wearing shoes?
I wear shoes on this surface very rarely. When we're doing I Fiori, and at the beginning when we're preparing the heads. There's a sort of very not coherent, very inarticulate narrative that we play with about me. It's in a way one could talk about a curator who is occasionally a little possessed, a curator who is extremely inappropriate with the archive that she's supposed to be looking after and curating, and then eventually a curator who has to resist the impulse to be possessed by the spirit of the objects she's curating. And in this, I think about, for example, the legend of the red shoes, the idea of being drawn by an object into a kind of spiritual state. There's a sort of fancy that we play with around her relationship with these pieces and the dangers, particularly, of course, in Salo, because the force field around those clothes, and I'm not talking about any fakery, I dare any of you to approach any of those pieces and not feel like super freaked out. What the energy they carry, I'm sure there are people here who haven't seen Salo, but for those who have, I think you'll know what I mean. That film has something in it that once seen, never forgotten, and to stand in front of a vestige of that film is, that's a spiritual business.
So, Olivier, what turns an object into a fetish? Because, some people will say, well, their objects are just objects.
If you decide. I have to say, I was thinking about myself because I'm quite a little tired, and I spent my life in the attic of my parents, sleeping on clothes of my sisters, and I had 4 sisters since I was 5 years old, and suddenly I was a curator in a fashion museum, and suddenly I realized it was the same life. I was always surrounded by clothes. It was the step before I understood I was very fetishist with the clothes. So they are not ghosts for me, they are just companions, comparses. They are just not alive, but they are talking about their soul, about fabrics, about something. So I don't know, I'm sure they are fetish if you decide. And I'm still believe that this land, which could be called fashion or museum of costumes or ordinary costume, are very strange. It is the most vulnerable land, and it still exists more than hers. So I'm still very fascinated by that. About the nudity, I have to say also, since the beginning, we realized, Tilda, since 10 years we are playing many performances, she's wearing always the same blues. It's always the same. It's a non-costume. It's the idea of nudity. It's like a mannequin atelier. The models you have, the mannequins you have in a artiste peintre atelier who inspired to draw. This is the idea. It was more shocking to show Tilda completely nude, and it probably, drove a sense which is not our sense. But I like the idea she's wearing an uniform of nudity, which is not the nudity.
How has the smell of the clothes, of the costumes, changed since you started this living exhibition?
I don't know that they have, and as we refer to in the performance, really intelligent cleaning leaves a little something. You don't want to take it all away. Porcile particularly has a magic all of its own, shall we say. Yeah.
I think that what really helped us come closer to what was happening and make it even more immersive was actually seeing the titles of the films being written in Greek. Does it make a difference to you when you say it in Cyrillic? Because, of course, if you say it in French, you still have the Latin alphabet. But saying it in Greek it makes quite an impression. I saw people taking pictures of the boxes because it was like, oh, this is actually for us.
This is ours. Yes, I love it. I love it. And we performed this piece in Italy, in Paris, and now here. And we're going to be taking it to other places. And it's an element that I really value. I love knowing that Pasolini belongs to all of us. And these films are totems everywhere. And of course, more and more, and we are very proud to have anything to do with, spreading the love, because, the more and more people are realizing what a portal Pasolini is, not just as a filmmaker, but as a thinker, as a poet, and as a figure of cultural resistance and inspiration. So yeah, I love seeing the Greek titles.
Each time you finish every night, you always thank him. Are you sure he's up there and not down there?
He's everywhere.
On that note, I am, of course, going to pass the microphone to our audience.
Yeah. Hi. Congratulations for tonight's performance. I would like to ask you something. Was there any special mentality on the order you presented those costumes? I mean, if it was a catwalk, at the end there was the bride's accessories. So I would like to know, and everything was white in the end, apart from the Exodus with the men's costume. So I was wondering whether there's a special mentality or a criteria, something for the order you chose the clothes.
You mean the order of the films?
From the very beginning up to the end.
I'm trying to remember. It's such a long time ago we made those decisions.
No, I don't really know. I remember we had this moment of rehearsals in Roma first to meet the costume, and then immediately after, because there were COVID before, so we spent 1 week to play with the costumes. And sometimes you don't know. It's like an exhibition. You choose the first clothes, which indicate the second one and the last one.
So the one brought the other.
I remember we chose to start with Évangile selon Saint Matthieu, and then also I remember when Tilda first tried to wear the costume of Salo, she was very disturbed immediately. So we saw it was a moment to finish. But in fact, we could do in another way if we had to invent today. No, it was not very clear. And it was not a question of finish by a wedding dress, even if it's more poetic than to start.
It was about finishing with Salo. That was definitely an early realization. And maybe starting with St. Matthew felt, I don't know, I don't know why we decided to start with St. Matthew, but yeah, we were just following our nose through the forest.
How about the music? What happened with the music? How did you decide upon the music?
This is the first piece we are doing in silence, but also more and more I like performances in silence, but it's dangerous to play in silence, especially for her. But no, we used to play with professional people who used to did our music, and recently we decided to select by themselves. And one day Gaël proposed to me a music coming from Firenze, and we loved. And we play again 6 times during Decameron. And then there is some African Namibi music for Canterbury. We tried not to be very exact by the movie. It was impossible to play the music coming from the movie. But I tried to see, for example, for Oedipe Roi, Pasolini used a lot of influences, inspiration coming from different countries. So I came back to hear some little bit music, and we finished by this classical music from Chopin, but it was like that. Now, the things I have to say, I don't know why. I always like to hear the same music 10 times, which is quite crazy. But I think it's like
Yeah, it becomes, you get into a
it's
trance, you
made-
become
voilà.
like a dervish. It's like
voilà,
spinning.
exactement.
Yes. Κάποιος άλλος θέλει να κάνει κάποια ερώτηση? Παρακαλώ.
Thank you. I have a rather silly question. Aren't you ever tempted, like this improper curator, to wear the costumes outside this live exhibition?
No, you know, the things that was very interesting, since I'm not an official curator anymore, because it could be very dangerous for me. But no, it was a very, I was tempted since a long time to touch. We used to touch with gloves, but I was tempted to maybe to wear a jacket of Marlene Dietrich, who knows? But it's it's absolutely impossible. The moment where I decided to stop my career as an official director, it made me a little poison to do something transgressive, especially with costume of theater, which are not very fragile. But, you know, actually, I'm cutting my own wardrobe because I used to kept every clothes, which are always the same. And it is like for many people, it's a question to keep all the costumes, all the shirts you have. So recently I decided to cut a page like a book in order to do a book of my wardrobe. And it's quite transgressive for me to cut a clothes, even if it's noble clothes, ordinary clothes. So every step I could destroy my position official of curator, I'm interested. But I have to say something which is not, I'm not very proud. She's doing for me.
I'm your avatar.
No, and also, you know, the world of museum are complex. There is a lot of things you can do on storage and you cannot do on an exhibition. For example, if you are a curator, you can go to the storage every day and you can take the clothes. That's why we invented Impossible Wardrobe 10 years ago, because it was a possibility. I remember Tilda used to wear some gloves. She had blues as a curator, and she ordered some clothes on fabrics. It is absolutely the same way when you are a curator, but it's bringing life. If you are doing only 20 minutes, it was 1 hour every night, instead to do an exhibition. Exhibitions, fashion exhibition or clothes exhibition are very difficult because it's always very fixed, very stable, and we don't know why they decide that. So I have to say our work is to try to open a new door.
I really want to tell you that, and I want to tell our audience that you're a great team, not just the two of you, I have to say that everybody who has been with you, it feels that you share more than just a few moments during a performance or during a production. And we felt that in here. And you really created this kind of, I would call it addictive electricity. Because I see members of the Onassis Stegi, and thank you for saying Stegi tonight, coming again and again. So it's not just me. I see some people who were waiting for tonight's show to finish so that they could enter again, or they stand behind, you know, and they choose different kind of positions because they are professionals. So they want to say it from different points. So thank you for giving this kind of essence and meaning and feeling to our home. And I want to tell you that I know that we have one more day, but we miss you already.
Merci beaucoup.
So please come back.
Merci de nous avoir invités. Thank you for
Thank you
inviting.
so much.
We're so grateful, and you know, we do feel honestly quite humble about this work. It's so inexplicable, bonkers. I don't know even what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing. And the idea of you inviting us and giving us this space, and you all coming and putting up with our inarticulacy is really, it's everything. And as we know, this is what we all need, because what we're really interested in doing is things that we haven't seen before, things that we haven't done before. And as an audience member, I also want to see things I've never seen before. And it's lovely to know that there are others like me. And I think this place clearly is a temple to that. And we are so grateful for your invitation. And we're just thrilled to have been here.
Thank you so much.